A hearing held by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Being seated is Henry Kissinger, one of the several former secretaries of state who have endorsed the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty signed last month in Prague by President Obama and Russian President Medvedev, calling for the U.S. and Russia to reduce the number of deployed missiles. This is live coverage of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on C-SPAN 3.
We are enormously privileged to welcome one of America's most distinguished statesmen, perhaps the Dean of Diplomacy in the United States, Dr. Henry Kissinger, who served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State to Presidents Nixon and Ford. This is our fourth hearing on the New START Treaty, and by our count, this is Dr. Kissinger's 66th appearance before this committee. We are particularly fortunate to have him. That's more than some senators on the committee, I think. We are particularly fortunate to have him back to testify because of his deep expertise on great power relations and nuclear strategy. It was 1957 when Dr. Kissinger helped define the study of nuclear deterrence by publishing one of the classic books on the subject, Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy. And while serving President Nixon, he successfully negotiated SALT I Accord, the first agreement to limit U.S. and Soviet nuclear weapons. In 2007, precisely 50 years after publishing his book, Dr. Kissinger once again shaped public debate on nuclear security when he joined with George Shultz, William Perry, and our former colleague Sam Nunn to endorse the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. That suggestion surprised many people. But Dr. Kissinger and his co-authors wrote that the spread of nuclear weapons to rogue states and possibly even terrorists means that the world is now on the precipice of a new, dangerous nuclear era. That, they argued, demanded a new way of thinking. Now, as you know, Dr. Kissinger does not just throw out empty strategy pronouncements. And that's precisely why his article laid out a list of concrete steps that would enhance our security in the immediate future. One of the steps Secretary Kissinger recommended is that we continue reducing the size of U.S. and Russian nuclear arsenals. New START, which lowers the legal limit on deployed warheads by up to 30%, is a responsible move in that direction. 4 decades of bilateral arms control treaties with Moscow have decreased fears of nuclear aggression and helped the United States and Russia to work together. The New START Treaty continues and advances the tradition of reductions that was forged in the original START Agreement and the Moscow Treaty. Secretary Kissinger and his co-authors have also argued that strategic arms control can help us to fight nuclear proliferation. The United States and Russia together constitute more than 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. That is why they wrote that we have a special responsibility, we in Russia, a special responsibility, obligation, and experience to demonstrate leadership. They said bilateral nuclear reductions are key to our global effort to reduce the spread of nuclear weapons. This is a crucial point in time. Some have said that other countries don't care how many nuclear weapons the United States and Russia have. But in fact, we've already seen that New START can help us fight nuclear proliferation and therefore nuclear terrorism. Last week, Secretary Clinton testified to this committee that New START had renewed American credibility at this month's conference in New York to review the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That means we've already been better able to isolate Iran and prevent it from diverting attention from its own troubling behavior. And the New START Treaty has re-energized our relationship with Russia, helping us to persuade Moscow to support a new round of UN sanctions against Iran. Since 2007, Dr. Kissinger and his co-authors have elaborated on their groundbreaking work. They have emphasized, among other things, the importance of the original START Treaty's verification mechanisms, which expired on December 5th of last year. Skeptics have argued that the New START Treaty's verification provisions are not as effective because they provide for fewer inspections. But that argument overlooks 3 crucial details. First, there are many fewer facilities to inspect today than when START was first signed. Second, for the first time ever, Russian missiles will be given a unique identification number that allows us to track that specific missile. And third, U.S. inspectors will be able, for the first time, to determine how many re-entry vehicles are on a Russian missile. Our military, at every level, and it is testified through Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is confident that New START's verification provisions get the job done. And the New START Treaty's safeguards are better than what we have right now. The fact is that until we ratify a treaty, we have none. So that's the choice. Secretary Kissinger has also argued that we must reduce tensions with Russia on missile defense so that we can cooperate more effectively. The preamble to the New START Treaty acknowledges the relationship between offensive forces and missile defenses and does nothing more than acknowledge the relationship. As Secretary Jim Baker testified last week, we're tipping our hat to Russia's concerns without giving anything away. Some people have insisted that the preamble constrains our ability to deploy missile defenses against rogue states. So let me be clear on this point. This accord imposes no restriction, zero, none, no restriction on our ability to defend ourselves. In fact, the administration has been clear that we will not be limited in any way in plans to continue to build missiles defenses to protect America from Iran or North Korea or any other individual nuclear threat. Dr. Kissinger knows how important bipartisanship is in our consideration of arms control agreements. The Senate approved SALT I by a vote of 88-2 during his tenure as National Security Advisor. Many years later, the Senate endorsed the original START Treaty, 93-6. The Moscow Treaty was approved with 95 senators voting in favor and none voting against. I am confident that once this committee concludes its deliberations, we will find overwhelming support for the New START Treaty as well. And part of that deliberation takes place today, as it has in our prior hearings, by inviting our distinguished statespeople from our country to share their thoughts with us. Today, as I've said previously, we are pleased to have one of our most distinguished statesmen of all, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Senator Lugar.
Mr. Chairman, I join you in welcoming our friend and our distinguished witness, former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Last week, the Foreign Relations Committee received testimony, as you pointed out, on the New START Treaty from Secretaries Gates and Clinton, from Admiral Mullen, and from former Secretary of State James Baker. In April, we heard from former Defense Secretaries Jim Schlesinger and William Perry. Our witnesses have expressed the common view that while there are questions to be answered about the treaty and our broader nuclear posture, a decision not to ratify the treaty would forego an opportunity and exacerbate the broader challenges to our foreign policy. Our hearings on the New START Treaty come at a time when we are witnessing fundamental changes in United States strategic planning. In addition to consideration of the treaty, this committee is studying the full meaning of the new nuclear posture review. And moreover, the treaty has coincided with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference underway in New York. Iran's continued pursuit of nuclear programs is in the background. The development of a new strategic concept for NATO and discussions related to the Ballistic Missile Defense Review are all in our consideration. The New START Treaty has been both directly and indirectly linked to each of these issues, and the Senate's decision on START will reverberate throughout our strategic relationships worldwide. The New START Treaty follows a period when we have had severe disagreements with Russia. Russian actions related to Iran, Afghanistan, and North Korea, for example, often have exhibited a reflexive resistance to United States positions, even when we have substantial community of interest. Russia's repeated use of energy exports as a political weapon and its treatment of Ukraine and Georgia demonstrate a hard line on regional issues. In this context, we should avoid ratcheting between excessive expectations and severe disappointments in our attitude toward Russia. We also should avoid the idea that the new START treaty can reset our relationship with Russia on its own. But recent difficulties in the U.S.-Russian relationship make the new START treaty more important, not